Europe says it is racing to deploy small modular reactors. The public framing is simple. Nuclear is back, energy security matters, and smaller reactors might be easier to build than the mega projects that struggled in the past. But that framing misses the deeper systems layer. What Europe is really testing is not just whether it can build reactors again. It is testing whether green hydrogen can ever become structurally stable at industrial scale. And at the center of that intersection sits Rolls-Royce SMR. Let's start from the verified ground. Rolls-Royce SMR is developing a small modular nuclear reactor design in the United Kingdom. It is based on established pressurized water reactor technology, scaled to roughly the size appropriate for modular deployment rather than gigawatt-scale plants. It has been selected by the UK government as the preferred SMR technology under its current nuclear expansion program. The design is still in regulatory assessment. Construction has not yet begun. No electricity is being produced, no hydrogen is being made from it. That clarity matters because much of the online conversation treats SMRs as if they are already reshaping the grid. They are not yet. So why does this matter for hydrogen? Because hydrogen's biggest weakness is not electrochemistry, it is utilization. Electrolyzers are expensive industrial assets. Their cost per kilogram of hydrogen depends heavily on how many hours per year they run. If an electrolyzer operates close to full time, its capital cost is spread over more output. If it operates intermittently, waiting for cheap renewable power, the cost per kilogram rises sharply. This is not a speculative claim, it is basic industrial economics. Utilization drives cost recovery. Wind and solar are essential to Europe's decarbonization strategy, but they are variable. That variability introduces price volatility and capacity factor constraints. Hydrogen projects built purely on intermittent electricity must either accept low utilization or invest in oversized systems and storage buffers. Both options increase complexity and risk. Now insert nuclear into that equation. A nuclear reactor, once operating, typically runs at high capacity factor. It produces steady output for long periods with planned maintenance intervals. That stability changes the utilization profile of connected industrial processes. If an electrolyzer is powered by firm electricity rather than intermittent surplus, it can run more consistently. That does not automatically make hydrogen cheap. Nuclear capital costs are high. Financing nuclear projects is complex. Regulatory timelines are long. But utilization stability is not trivial. It changes the shape of the business model. This is where the narrative shifts. The question is not, will nuclear replace renewables? The question is, what electricity mix makes hydrogen bankable? Hydrogen at scale will require enormous electricity supply. Producing hydrogen through electrolysis is energy intensive. When Europe speaks about millions of tons of hydrogen for steel, fertilizer, refining, and chemical production, the implied electricity demand is immense. This is not a marginal addition to the grid, it is structural. Industrial clusters, ports, steel regions, refinery corridors are where hydrogen demand will concentrate. These clusters require reliable molecules. Steel production cannot stop because the wind slowed. Ammonia plants cannot pause daily because solar output dipped. If hydrogen is to substitute for fossil-derived feedstock, it must approach the reliability of the systems it replaces. This is the architectural layer most public debates ignore. Rolls-Royce SMR, if deployed successfully in the 2030s as planned, could provide firm electricity near industrial centers. The United Kingdom has identified potential sites for new nuclear development, including locations with existing grid infrastructure. Other European countries are exploring SMR options through partnerships and selection processes. These are still planning stages, but they indicate alignment between nuclear revival and industrial decarbonization goals. Hydrogen integration with SMRs is being studied. Industry collaborations have examined how nuclear electricity and potentially nuclear heat could support hydrogen production. But again, no commercial SMR hydrogen facility exists yet. Any cost projections remain modeled scenarios. The important point is not current output, it is the systems logic being explored. Hydrogen is flexible demand, nuclear is stable supply. In a renewable-heavy grid, hydrogen can absorb excess electricity when prices fall. In a tight supply environment, nuclear can ensure that hydrogen production does not collapse due to intermittency. When combined intentionally, these technologies can reduce overall system volatility. Now apply the stress test. If subsidies decline, if carbon pricing fluctuates, if hydrogen demand scales more slowly than projected, which hydrogen projects survive? Those built on volatile electricity inputs may face unstable operating economics. Those anchored to long-term firm power contracts may appear more financeable. Nuclear-backed hydrogen does not eliminate risk. It changes its distribution. Higher upfront capital, lower operational volatility. Capital markets care about predictability. Banks and institutional investors evaluate cash flow stability. If hydrogen production is linked to a stable electricity supply with long-term contractual structure, revenue modeling becomes more straightforward. This is not a claim that financing becomes easy. It is a claim that volatility decreases in one dimension. Europe's strategic context adds another layer. Energy security remains politically sensitive. Industrial competitiveness is under pressure. Carbon pricing mechanisms influence production costs across heavy industry. Building domestic low-carbon energy capacity reduces exposure to imported fuels. Pairing that capacity with domestic hydrogen production strengthens supply sovereignty. These considerations extend beyond climate rhetoric. They sit at the core of industrial policy. But caution is necessary. Nuclear construction in Europe has a mixed history. Large projects have faced delays and cost overruns. SMRs promise modularization and standardization to reduce those risks. But until multiple units are built successfully, that promise remains unproven at scale in Europe. Public acceptance varies by country. Political continuity cannot be assumed across decades-long infrastructure timelines. Hydrogen faces its own uncertainties. Infrastructure for transport and storage remains under development. Industrial offtake contracts are still emerging. Electrolyzer manufacturing capacity must expand significantly to meet long-term targets. Policy frameworks continue to evolve. So this is not a narrative of inevitability, it is a narrative of convergence. Both hydrogen and SMRs operate on long timelines. Regulatory assessment, permitting, financing, and construction stretch into the 2030s. Industrial hydrogen demand targets also cluster around 2030-2040 milestones. If SMRs begin operating in that window, their output could coincide with hydrogen scaling. If they do not, hydrogen will rely more heavily on renewable variability and grid balancing mechanisms. Another technical nuance matters. Rolls-Royce SMR is based on pressurized water reactor technology, not advanced high-temperature reactor designs. High-temperature reactors may offer thermodynamic advantages for certain hydrogen production pathways, such as high-temperature steam electrolysis. Rolls-Royce's design does not fundamentally alter hydrogen chemistry. Its primary contribution would be stable electricity supply. That distinction is important for technical accuracy. Still, stable electricity is not trivial. It affects electrolyzer sizing, storage requirements, and long-term contract structures. Let's examine the alternative scenario. If SMR deployment stalls due to cost, regulatory friction, or political change, hydrogen remains primarily coupled to intermittent renewables. That model can work. Renewable electricity costs continue to decline in many regions. Grid-scale storage improves annually. Hydrogen can function as a long-duration storage vector, absorbing renewable surplus and providing system balancing. But the variability challenge remains. Seasonal variation in renewable output is particularly relevant in Northern Europe. Hydrogen production profiles tied solely to renewable output may fluctuate significantly over the year. Industrial users, however, require continuous supply. Bridging that gap requires additional storage or contractual complexity. If SMRs succeed in delivering predictable electricity into the 2030s, hydrogen production can shift from opportunistic operation to infrastructure-grade operation. That is a qualitative change. It moves hydrogen closer to the reliability profile of a natural gas-derived feedstock. But execution will decide the outcome. Rolls-Royce SMR's progress through regulatory assessment, site development, and eventual construction will be watched closely not only by nuclear advocates, but by hydrogen strategists. Because if firm low-carbon electricity becomes abundant and reliable, hydrogen's cost volatility declines. If it does not, hydrogen remains more exposed to market swings. This is why the headline should not focus on a nuclear race alone. It should focus on energy architecture. Europe is not choosing between nuclear and hydrogen. It is evaluating whether integrating nuclear into its future grid can stabilize hydrogen at scale. The transition from fossil fuels to low-carbon systems is not a single technology event. It is a systems reconfiguration. Technologies that appear separate in public debate, wind, solar, nuclear, hydrogen, interact in complex ways in real grids and real industrial clusters. Hydrogen without stable power remains vulnerable to intermittency. Nuclear without flexible demand may struggle to integrate smoothly into highly renewable grids. Together they can complement each other. That does not mean they will. It means the integration question is strategically significant. The coming decade will determine whether small modular reactors transition from concept to deployed infrastructure in Europe. It will also determine whether hydrogen moves from pilot projects to foundational industrial feedstock. The timelines overlap, the risks overlap, the policy frameworks overlap. If SMRs are built on time and within budget, and if hydrogen demand matures with credible offtake agreements, Europe could create a resilient, low-carbon industrial backbone. If either falters, the system will adapt differently, leaning more heavily on renewables and storage or on imported hydrogen. So the real story is conditional. Rolls-Royce SMR is not simply leading a race to build smaller reactors. It represents a test case for whether firm nuclear capacity can underpin Europe's hydrogen ambitions. The outcome will not be determined by announcements. It will be determined by regulatory approvals, construction execution, capital discipline, and industrial demand signals. Hydrogen's future is often discussed as a technology race. In reality, it is an integration race. It depends on how well electricity systems, industrial processes, and capital markets align. Europe may believe it is building reactors. What it may actually be doing is testing whether hydrogen can evolve from a policy aspiration into a structurally stable industrial molecule. And that test will unfold quietly through permits, financing agreements, and construction milestones, long before headlines declare a winner.